Well, folks, thanks for tuning in again today. The numbers continue to increase. I appreciate the support because it shows there's an increasing number of people who want to see and hear about the news that matters, but they'd also like to hear and see about what's the real, some of the nuance behind the scenes on that. So let's jump right into it. Jeffrey Epstein, just not going away as the files continue to get opened and released. And it's been amazing now with this last 3 million page dump, which is just phenomenal. There's so much on this individual and all the emails and everything. And there was lots of attention earlier on when there was a possibility, people were hoping beyond hope, that Trump would be significantly implicated in those files, and he's not. And matter of fact, it's turning out that there's way more Democrats, it seems, and university professors and people on the left that are featured in the files. But here's the key thing that has really emerged and is not getting a whole lot of attention from mainstream media, and that's the degree to which, we just touched on this yesterday, the degree to which Jeffrey Epstein was involved in discussions with top world leaders and top financiers on promoting the myth of a global catastrophe being imminent and being upon us. Remember, the global elites have been predicting for about 40 years now that the world is going to end imminently if we don't start using everything related to either solar or wind and that type of a thing. And amazing now what's coming out, the discussions between Epstein, top financiers, top bankers, and top politicians in the world, those involved in the World Economic Forum. He was a key figure, many of them emailing him constantly, many visiting him on the island. And these are the things, sorry folks, you got a little bit of background noise just kicked in there. I don't know why. It's going to happen from time to time. I'm in a busy facility here, but I'm going to continue here. And the amazing thing is why? Why does it seem there is so little mainstream media interest on this topic of Epstein and his incredible involvement on the whole climate file? Very fascinating. On the climate file, interesting report out of Nova Scotia, Canada, where a number of years ago a multi-million turbine was built to try and harvest the energy from tides, the tide of the ocean itself. And that is now being dismantled. They're trying to find a way. This is a huge building and infrastructure sitting out there in the water. And now they're trying to figure out how can they dismantle it because it just doesn't work. This is one of many stories. The globe is literally cluttered with all kinds of, look, I give people credit for trying something and seeing if something is going to work, but as more and more as these colossal infrastructures were built and constructed and found not to be working, it's just not that largely reported. But there is some sense with the investigative studies that are going on now that the amount of impact on the environment, first of all, just building and constructing these huge infrastructures, solar, wind, and others. Not that there isn't a time or place for some of them, but the amount to which they're being dismantled, to which they have to be reconstructed, or to which they have to be, recycled and broken down, and the effect on the environment on just that is very significant. And when you add in the fact that the studies that are emerging that oil and gas refined products which are going to replace and which can replace, for instance, the thousands of coal energy facilities in China and in other places, that needs to be taken into effect. And more we're seeing the results of the test showing that if you're really concerned about lowering of emissions globally and carbon emissions, it does seem to be that the increasingly refined oil and gas products are having far more and a much more beneficial effect than some of these ambitious and yet totally failing, very expensive other projects. Well, a big story related to Canada-US relations is President Donald Trump trying to say, or he is saying, that he's not going to allow for the opening of the new bridge called the Gordie Howe Bridge, which is between Windsor and Detroit. That particular bridge is in addition to what's called the Ambassador Bridge. The Windsor-Detroit is a huge through point of trade between Canada and the U.S. It's estimated that 25% of all Canada-U.S. trade crosses at that Windsor-Detroit crossing, and President Trump saying he is very upset that Canada isn't paying its fair share. Now look, the debate on that is going to continue. It's going to go back and forth either ways. The main thing is we have to question, and I am questioning, the tactics of Canada if they think they're applying pressure that's going to make the U.S. or make President Trump cave by drawing closer to China, that has to be seen as a questionable strategy. China, which is the world leader on human rights violations, the world leader on invading the internet infrastructure of other countries, and Canada, yet the Prime Minister Carney has yet to even say a critical word at all about China. So it's simply not the way. If you're going to want to make negotiations and make headway on the negotiations with the U.S. on elements like the Gordie Howe Bridge in Detroit, Windsor, Canada is going to have to alter its strategy. And by the way, why doesn't Prime Minister Carney, he has not raised his voice about the imprisonment of Jimmy Lai. This is the well-known activist, Chinese activist, who has just recently been jailed for 20 years. He's already 78 years old, so effectively he's been jailed for life for wanting to promote democracy in China, and not a word of protest from the Canadian government. So some things that the Canadian government should be looking in the mirror about right there. And as far as Canadians and their effect on communism around the world, now we've got the three major airlines in Canada all saying they are going to be suspending their flights to Cuba. Why? Because they're concerned about supporting the communist dictatorship there? No, there's no gas. There's no aviation fuel. It's depleting in Cuba, and this is hugely ironic that Canadians, which are on record as being the largest supporters of the Cuban communist government, and they're the largest supporters just because of the massive amounts of tourism travel to Cuba over the years. And isn't it an irony now? And I feel badly, look, for anybody who's gotten stranded, and I suppose it could be argued there's worse places in the world to be stranded than on a Cuban beach, but they're running out of food, they're running out of water. I've been there on agricultural missions in the past, and they were already depleted. So the irony of this, and also the irony that mainstream media in Canada continues to refuse to report negatively anything about this, the communist dictatorship that has ruled Cuba for many, many decades, forced their people into poverty, all kinds of shortages all the time, and not a peep of protest or concern from Canadian mainstream media. Well, switching to main events in the U.S., the Nancy Guthrie case, this very tragic situation where Nancy Guthrie, the mother of Savannah Guthrie, has still not been found, this kidnapping. I'm sticking with my prediction that, unfortunately, this case, whatever happens, however it rolls out, is going to you are going to see an increasing number of these kidnap, high-profile cases, because the complete savage psychopaths who involve themselves in this kind of activity know that they will get huge coverage and become instantly infamous. And I'm not criticizing the approach that the media is taking or that Savannah herself is taking. She desperately wants to see her mother back, but it is going to lead to more of these cases. And I'm going to cast a bit of a cloud. Don't get mad at me. I'm just looking statistically here. One thing we need to consider, it is possible. It is actually possible that this case may not be resolved. And I'm using as an example of that, our American viewers might not be as aware as Canadians are that back in 2017, probably the most famous kidnapping case in Canadian history, the case of Honey and Barry Sherman. He was a owner of a large pharmaceutical company, and the case of them being found murdered in their home without a trace of evidence. This case has been going on since 2017, not a trace of evidence in terms of that tragic situation. It is possible. I know we have our hopes up, and there are tremendous investigative forces at work on this case. We wish them well. Keep in mind, anything can happen on this, so they continue to be in our prayers. On the battle of education and on cultural Marxism, we see this battle and the battle they say about wokeism and DEI and all of this forced diversity and what that does to hiring and everything else. The University of Calgary has made an announcement that they are completely abandoning this forced and really fabricated policies related to being woke, DEI, to making sure everybody's included based on things other than merit. And they've said that they are going to be a merit-based university when it comes to hiring professors. And of course, the system has gone berserk on them. And one of the top people in Canada who's responsible for advising and giving recommendations on the funding of universities has come out. Like, the email that was published is almost violently abusive of the University of Calgary administration and its professors. And they are saying they're going to cut off funding to the University of Calgary unless the University of Calgary brings back these, frankly, racist policies of hiring people on the basis of other than merit. That, of course, flies in the face of what Martin Luther King Jr. always said, that people should be hired based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And so the battle rages. And you need to ask yourself, if you're going to university, if you're sending your kids or grandkids to university, do you want them going to one of the universities that is not based on merit and, in fact, is punishing those who do think that merit is and should be a factor? So we'll watch for that. There also needs to be something developed by the business community itself, whether it's chambers of commerce or the National Chamber of Commerce. There needs to be clearly laid out runways and pathways for people to get degrees without having to go through the 4-year indoctrination of cultural Marxism that is present in almost all universities. It can still be determined if a student has achieved certain areas of knowledge and expertise, but do they have to do that while they are pummeled and they are subjugated and they are browbeaten by those who are using policies based on this woke DEI systems that discourage merit? So there really needs to be that development that with AI and the fabulous capabilities and availabilities of education and also experience on the job that can be made online and in conjunction with businesses, there needs to be creative ways. If people want that system that is left-leaning cultural Marxist, then they should be there to have, if that's how they want to turn out and how they want their kids and grandkids to turn out. But if they want a system that is truly respectful of all people and built on freedom of choice and built on intellectual freedom, there needs to be a clear pathway for them towards a degree also. Well, in terms of this kind of topic, but not really, but when you look at the cultural Marxism that controls the heights of power in our judicial system, another case now, you see some of these in the US, but this one's in Canada, where a judge has ruled. Now, this is a particular case of a 32-year-old Métis Cree individual pleading guilty, actually wasn't even found guilty, pleading guilty to the sexual involvement to sexual violation of a 15-year-old. So it's a 32-year-old person and a 15-year-old person, and they've just had their sentence reduced by 25%. And the reason they've had them reduced by 25% is because they said that the person who was guilty of this, in fact, was affected by colonialism and therefore should have it reduced in terms of their actual sentence. So people need to take in mind and begin to consider, is this an appropriate use of social policy? Yes, all mitigating factors should be taken into effect in a particular judgment case, but in this particular situation, 32-year-old Métis Cree, 15-year-old and a sexual assault, and having their sentence reduced drastically, something really to think about. You know, we have cases certainly in Canada where judges are being forced to take certain courses to sensitize themselves on various issues. Okay, that's fine, but how about being sensitized on the issue of how much of a break should people get because of their upbringing? And that's really what this comes down to. Well, the halftime show from the Super Bowl is still being looked at and debated out there in media, and the alternate halftime show, the Turning Point USA show, is running into criticisms among those who are on the Charlie Kirk side and on the Christian side. The TBN network is being criticized because So much of the singing and the songs that were done, it would give the impression that anybody who is a supporter of TPUSA must be country western. Nothing wrong with country music, but the lyrics in many of the songs are out there, alcohol related, some saying sexual overtones, and that the songs and the messaging would not have been a message that Charlie Kirk himself would have approved. So possibly some criticism there coming to TPUSA, who approved it. Did Charlie Kirk's widow approve of that messaging? They got about 5 million viewers. Of course, that pales in comparison with what was viewed on the Super Bowl, but something that's being looked at and being considered maybe for next time. Well, the reports in terms of things heating up in the Middle East and on the Iranian front, recent reports as recent as yesterday from the US, 100 C-17 Globemaster aircraft being deployed to the Middle East, 100 C-17s. The C-17s, you should be aware, these are heavy lift aircraft designed to carry large-scale troop movement, also heavy equipment movement. They're designed to land and take off in somewhat shorter conditions and on gravel runways. So clearly a signal that the capacity to move large numbers of troops and equipment is definitely moving to and now centering more and more in the Middle East. Well, as we look at these factors continuing to go up, we see continually Elon Musk in the news, and now he's talking about the possibility of the United States actually going bankrupt. And some people might roll their eyes and say, oh, well, that's just, Musk musing. But he's talking about the fact that there's a $38 trillion debt in the US, and that requires $1 trillion a year just in interest payments, just to finance the debt. That is the same amount of money. Actually, it's more than the amount of money that covers all of the American expense on defense and military. So he's really talking about a very significant move here that is certainly, in his view and in the views of other financiers, governments can get to the place where they actually can't afford their own social programming. And that's something they're going to have to be taking into effect. It's the same in Canada, where, and it happened actually as far back as 1993, where the International Monetary Fund did say to the Canadian government, you're running out of runway, you're running out of room, your debt payments are so large that you may not be able to borrow money. And that word's from the bond market. You may not be able to borrow money. And it's something to keep in check. Politicians hate this talk because it means they're going to have to reduce their giveaway programs. But Musk, as much as people might not like or appreciate him, Musk himself has pointed out that there are billions and billions of dollars that can be saved through significant and meaningful analyzing fraud and waste, that there are billions that can go to healthcare and education if governments would take a significant approach to health and waste. Well, looking at that question on the Canadian front, we see the province of Alberta, it's not all bad news in Canada, not all bad news in the United States. When you're looking at, are there some areas where things are growing, where finances are seem to be stable, and Alberta is one of those. And again, just like states like Florida and Texas and others, which focus on keeping taxes lowered, which focus on government expenditures to those who are truly needy, but not on wasteful programs. And because Alberta is continuing along this front, is sending a signal across the country, and people from across the country are moving to Alberta in greater numbers, just as they are fleeing from states like California to go to states that have lower tax regimes. So here we see a situation where, just using this as one example, this was in the real estate news yesterday coming out of Calgary, Alberta, a 65-year-old bungalow that sold in 2022 for $432,000 was now listed just 7 days ago for $699,000. So think of that. In 2022, it was $432,000. And then yesterday or last week listed at $699 and sold yesterday for $715,000. Why is that? And of course, you're going to get the socialists, and you're going to get people screaming, saying, "Oh, this is people gouging, and this is realtors gouging." No, it's not. It's a result of increasing numbers of people finding prosperity in provinces like Alberta, which respect hardworking people and which don't punish people working hard is drawing, and isn't this strange, attracting people from provinces which are more socialistic and don't offer these types of friendly economic arenas. Well, in the Olympics, aside from the story which we talked about yesterday of the medals themselves breaking, who's breaking the records in terms of medals? Well, Norway is leading so far, 5 golds, 1 silver, and 3 bronze. Canada is in 12th place. The U.S. is in 5th place. Think of that. Norway, which has over the last 100 years won the most number of medals at a Winter Olympics, is again leading. Norway with a population of about 5 million. The U.S. with a population of, depending where you want to land it, 380 million is in 5th place. So keep an eye on those Norwegians. Well, in today, right now, there is the Synod. That's the meeting of the Church of England. Will be ushering in formally for their first time their new Archbishop. And as you know, we've talked about it here, she is really promoting the acceptance and advancement of LGBTQ relationships, same-sex relationships. And of course, we all believe that all people should be loved. All people are worthy of love, but not all practices are definitely being condoned biblically. So she's taking that approach. And the Church of England continues to lose followers, as does its counterpart in the United States, which is called the Episcopal Church, and in Canada it's known as the Anglican Church. But in the same day, reporting the opening of the Synod of the Church of England, there's a report about the Excel Centre in London, which just hosted a large gathering of young people, 2,000 of which, this is obviously a Christian-based gathering, 2,000 of which made public commitments to Christ, surrendering their lives to Christ. That's in the midst of the Anglican Church dropping in terms of population. Just one other example, the Hereford Church, also in England, has reported in the last year a 40% growth, mainly coming from young people 18 to 35. So things are happening, some churches increasing, some decreasing. As we close out the broadcast, let's keep Jimmy Lai in mind. Jimmy Lai is a very well-known Chinese promoter. He lives in China of freedom of speech, freedom of religion. He himself converted to Catholicism about just a little less than 10 years ago. And he's always been a promoter. He was given the opportunity to leave. He's wealthy, he's very successful, to leave China because he was in danger. He said, no, I want to continue to speak up for freedom of speech, freedom of religion in China. He has now been jailed. He's been given a 20-year sentence. He's 78 years old, so that's the equivalent of a life sentence. And isn't it fascinating? Again, mainstream media, yeah, they report it, but not with the same level of heat and anger as they would when a journalist, for instance, is captured somewhere or put in jail. And mainstream media just not quite so excited if the person happens to be a Christian. Very interesting perspective, folks. Thanks for joining in today, and give me your comments. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye now.